What's good, Who Dat Nation? Welcome into the podcast. Thursday evening here. We're going to give you some updates on what the team is doing. We are in the dry spell of July, which means that you can't expect the same level of news and tick that we are used to. We do have a couple pieces to mention today, a couple roster pieces to kind of focus on. One, got to be happy that New Orleans Saints signed Isaiah Foskey, 3 sacks a game, whatever he ends up being, hopefully really good, better than the past 2 defensive ends. Although Peyton Turner's recent workout video, of course, has got everybody going Turner crazy here in the summer heat, but whatever. I just need a defensive end to be good that ain't named Cameron Jordan. I don't care who they are. I mean, Carl Granderson, Tano Passignon, it doesn't matter who you are. Somebody needs to pop off. And then releasing Billy Price. We'll also go over the entire Saints roster as it stands right now because, well, not everybody might be familiar where it is at. Now, keep in mind that it will change. Almost guaranteed you're going to have the Saints roster change even more. I mentioned this in the last episode where we had a couple of roster moves to discuss, that nothing that you see right now being done at the end of June, etc., can necessarily be set in stone. Maybe these have a little bit different there just because of why the releases and stuff happen, but we'll mention those. But first, let's give a shout out to those who are in the chat. Dr. Bilioshi, Rainey, Bim, good to see y'all. Jimbo, Chemo, James Griffon. Also, moderator TJ, good to see still Bill Lester, Charles Bird. Who dat to everybody. So glad that y'all are in here tonight. So the biggest one that I actually dislike, I guess is the right word, is it's not like I disagree with the move. I just had hoped to see where this could maybe lead. And we had this same thing with Forrest Lamp where I said, really, it's no big deal if you bring him in and he doesn't print in anything, but, you know, keep an eye out. And this time it's with Billy Price. Saints are releasing center Billy Price. They just signed him about a month ago, but being released for a non-football injury designation, which does still open the door for potentially him coming back. No idea what that injury is. I'll be honest, I did not even try to reach out and figure out what's going on. Just simply, this is the straight up news, being released for a non-football injury. So maybe he returns when that is fixed. Maybe he doesn't. And as crazy as it might sound, roster spots are at a premium. When you are going through this process, you are trying to cycle through as many people as you can, bringing as many grown men to play as many grown positions as you can find. And even though you're used to the regular season being limited to 53 players and, you know, having your practice squad, etc., during this time, man, they really have a list of names that can be 250 people long, but obviously you can't have that many on the team at any given time, that they're trying to evaluate and see, can they help us win football games leading up to this season? And even beyond that, not necessarily even starters, because Billy Price was never going to start for New Orleans, but he could have been an effective backup for Eric McCoy. Now the only real center on the backup chart right now will be Alex Philstrom, even though Nick Saldivari has played center, and then, of course, Cesar Ruiz played center in college. But I think it's been very clear that Cesar Ruiz, at least as of last year, had found a starting spot and had finally started to really show some of that early round potential at right guard. Probably don't want to look at moving him anywhere. And then you could even, I guess, in theory, move Anders Pete inside if you really wanted to get crazy. Calvin Throckmorton can move inside. But in terms of like just pure who is your center right now, it's Alex Philstrom. And we'll see if that ends up leading anywhere or if Billy Price ends up being a guy that returns. Again, this is the reason I liked him is, one, he's a player that I, got to scout. So a little bit of familiarity there. He's from the 2018 draft. He's played in the league for like 5 years now. New Orleans would have been his 4th team, so it's not to say that he secretly is a great player, but he's a former first-round pick that has had a lot of starts, 45 starts. He was the starter last year for Arizona, and I'm not here to say that he's secretly an amazing player, but if you can get a guy that has starter quality, starter qualities to him, and he be your primary backup, similar to what you've had with Hurst, that has to give you a little bit more confidence and excitement compared to maybe just another name that rolls into Metairie. So, yeah, I would really like to see if that pans out to something else. I really wish we had more details about what this injury issue could be, but we'll just have to wait and see how New Orleans plans to move past this point, because as it stands, like I said, you're really, really thin at that particular position unless you're just that excited about Alex Philstrom, who's never played an NFL snap, and is 24 years old, which is kind of old for a rookie. I mean, it's not terribly old. We've seen older players come into the league, 23, 22 years old, but 24, never having played a down, yeah, that's a little bit of an age. So, you want to have quality veterans in your backup spots whenever possible. And sometimes quality veterans can be guys who've been in the league for 4 or 5 years and haven't really started that much, but still have the experience of being there. Shout out to Caden Ellis, who is now with the Atlanta Falcons. We'll see how he performs as a full-time starter. But, I think that most people have a little bit more of a trepidation feeling moving into a season with a pure rookie as your backup. You obviously want to have the best roster. Hard to imagine rookies being that guy. Les says, you think we re-sign Billy at some point for the right price? I don't think price is an issue here. I just think the designation for his release kind of explains it with him having a non-football injury. I don't know what he did. I mean, he could have got carpal tunnel playing Madden. Who knows? I truly have no clue. It really, he could have been bowling and dropped, a 12-pounder and broke his toes. It could have been anything. So I think you bring in a guy that has that level of value with the anticipation that he is going to earn a pretty significant backup spot. And to see him gone in a month before you even get to training camp and preseason, unless he just looked that terrible. Keep in mind that he started with Arizona last year. And the year before that, he started with New York. This is not a guy that's been bouncing around as a backup, even though he has not shown himself to be a high-quality starter. It's a little bit of a, a letdown to expectations if you had any. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. Next up, Isaiah signing his contract. Now, we don't have the exact numbers for the contract yet. The only ones who we're really waiting on, or who we were crazy waiting on, was this one. The first week after the draft, we had Howden, Saldivari, Miller signed, and Perry. And then another week later, you had Breezy and Jake Haener. And we were waiting on this one. And now that his rookie contract is signed, we are all booted and looted for the New Orleans Saints 2023 draft class. They are all on paper, in ink, ready to go for camp. And this is not, I don't know if I'm going to say this is the most important one for me, but I think it's the one the team needs the most. And that isn't to say that I don't think they need a 3-tech. I've spoken really highly about how important I think getting a quality 3-tech is for this team, and I still believe what I said there. I really believe that the future of the offensive line needs guys like Nick Saldivari to develop. And I definitely think that the running back position, with a combination of age and just situation, you want Kendra Miller to pop off. And that's not even speaking of, can A.T. Perry surprise? What does model Jake Haener ever turn into besides maybe being in, Barbie 2? So all of that aside, I think that the edge position is the one that needs to hit the most because it is 2-factor critical. And when I say 2-factor critical, it's when you look around the league right now, everybody's talking about a resurgence and a renewal in the run game. We talked about that this past Tuesday where the running backs are complaining about their contracts. But out of that argument, because I know we already had it, and you can have whatever side of that you want. We're going to leave that in episode, 676. But as it pertains to right now, you obviously saw the New Orleans Saints take a step back in run defense. I do think that stuffing up the interior, good little offensive and defensive line puns are always welcome. Stuffing up the interior of the defensive line is important. I think you did that with, probably the most disrespected defensive lineman on the team right now because they gave this guy a 70 rating in Madden. Literally rookies coming into the league who've never played a down with a better rating. Damn, what did Kalen Saunders do to you, Madden? But I do think that because of, if you remember, and I know so many of y'all watch a lot of the games more than just on the broadcast, but when it comes to setting the edge and stopping the run, New Orleans has historically put a lot of the onus on that and a lot of responsibility on defensive ends for both Cameron Jordan and the backside, weak side guy, however you want to call that name, whether it was Davenport, whether it was even at times Trey Hendrickson, whether you're going all the way back to the Alex Okafors. When you've had this Dennis Allen system, they've relied very heavily on having good discipline as the backside defensive lineman, that in men on the line of scrimmage, because of the way that they attack the run. It's one of the ways that they were so successful. Now, you still need to win your one-on-one matchups, which is why Kalen Saunders was important as a signing. It's why that you hope Brian Breezy can be like his quarterback Hall of Fame counterpart. You want all those things, but you've got to have success at the edge. And I'm not trying to write off Peyton Turner yet, because I think it's only fair that we gave Cesar Ruiz a legitimate second shot, technically a third shot. Peyton Turner deserves the same opportunity. The only thing kind of like really speaking out against Peyton Turner in that particular instance is Cesar Ruiz was not healthy scratches on game days, and you just don't see first-round draft picks be healthy scratches on game days. But I still want him to be a successful player in New Orleans. So you give him that third year to show that he can do that, to show that he even deserves consideration for a fifth-year option, let alone an extension. So you've got to see that from him, but at the same time, there's a reason you went and drafted a guy in the second round. Even if you expect him to be mostly a positional pass rusher, he's going to be putting into the situation of having to stop and defend the run. And because of that, this is actually a signing that I think needed to happen. Obviously, because he's your pick. Obviously, because you want him on the field. But you need to really make sure that he's available in camp, seeing as many reps as possible, because he is going to be put under a lot of pressure, and arguably the most pressure of any draft pick this year. And I think there's going to be, just due to circumstances outside of his control, and chat, those who are here live, you can confirm it or not, I think that he's going to have more expectations from Saints fans, even though he's not a first-round draft pick. Saints fans are going to put the expectation of him to have success because Davenport never transpired into success and because Turner has yet to do so. So I think that there's going to be an expectation of him being successful because he's a third guy in the same mold being drafted. Can he be successful? Yes, exactly, TJ Foskey. Now, I'm not saying Breezy is not important. I've really harped on the importance of 3-tech. I've talked about why Onyemata and Rankins as a duo was so great and why you need that penetrating guy to be that great pass rusher. And I do think that Brian can be that. But in terms of overall play, defensive end is still the biggest question mark on this team. To me, defensive end is a bigger question mark than left tackle. Because even if Penning doesn't work out, I know exactly what is behind him. That doesn't mean I'm necessarily excited about what's behind him, but I know exactly what's behind him. I don't know at all about anybody opposite Cameron Jordan. And technically, I don't necessarily know about Cameron Jordan because at some point, that age is going to hit. And it might not be this year. It might not be next year, and it might not even be the year after. It could be 4 years from now. It truly could, because Cameron Jordan is a very special athlete. I promise you. Got into this on Twitter yesterday, where I was like, look, the average person, there just are not many humans who can play in the NFL. And there are people out there who believe that you can just be an in-shape person and you are an athlete ready for professional football. Like there truly are just construction workers waiting out there. And to quote the names brought up, the Michael Lewises and the Kurt Warners of the world are few and far between. The extremely rares, the basically nevers, the statistically nevers. Finding these guys is extremely difficult. So you need to have something that pans out, and you just don't know what's on the opposite side. So I think that even though you can believe that Cameron Jordan has some level of success this year, you still have no clue what's opposite him. And if you don't have any idea before training camp is over, I really can't say confidently that I believe this defense remains in that top 10 category. They were even in last year, even with the defensive line being more of a detriment than it's been in the past. You've got to find that answer this year. You just got to. So, just got to. And I think at the end of the day, sure, this is just a podcast episode in the middle of July. But the more opportunities and more reps you get Foskey in, the better. I know that's cliche. I know that's just regular football stuff. But I really can't stress the importance of what I feel like the edge and defensive end position is going to be this year in terms of success or not success. And we can have full-on conversations about Peyton Turner. We really can. And we can do that tonight. I think that Peyton Turner has not shown enough in the 13 games you've seen him, which is 3 sacks in 13 games and like 6 QB hits. He literally has equal number of you're not playing because you are a healthy scratch as he does sacks in his NFL career. That is not, those are not the receipts that need to get pulled. We can talk about his potential, about why he can be that guy. But no matter who that guy is, somebody's got to answer the call. And to remind everybody of who your defensive ends are right now, behind Cameron Jordan, Tano Passignon, who mostly plays on the strong side, which is Cameron Jordan's side. Then you've got Carl Granderson, who does typically play on the weak side, but plays both defensive end positions. In this case, would likely line up a lot more opposite of Cameron Jordan. Then you've got Isaiah, your brand new second round draft pick, pick number 40. Then you've got Peyton Turner, Jabari Zuniga, and Nico Lelos. And I don't expect the last two I've mentioned to even make the team. Nico being a guy who's been in the league, I think, like 6 years, was mostly with New York, has gone on and off their practice squad. And yeah, sure, maybe he ends up being the next guy like Caden Ellis to be a practice squad / roster warrior who just has a pop-off moment. Remember, we can't bank on those, so we'll wait and see what that turns into, if anything. And the same thing kind of goes for Jabari, where been in the league like 6 years, with New York, was with Seattle, and was even with New Orleans last year. At 25, turning 26 this year, mostly a career practice squad type of guy. Is he going to pop off? Maybe, but you definitely don't book it. You definitely don't bet on it. And if you do, you just got more money to bet on than I do. So you've got to really kind of have that pop off from somebody. And I will agree with Jerry that I'm glad somebody's locked in. Really am. I'm glad that the entire Saints draft class is signed. But we definitely got to get it to pop off. Now, Arthur says, has he improved in terms of his fall step? We have no idea. You really can't determine if a guy's improved in fall step until you see him in game situation. And again, I'm not trying to throw out cliches. I'm really not. But truthfully, you can practice something and look good in practice. But game situations are always unique situations. And even practice games, and honestly, even practices against other opponents that aren't controlled situations in your city with your coach and with your best friend teammate, with who can sometimes even be your roommate. You can't see that and go, it's definitely going to translate. You've got to see it translate in scenarios. Are they working on it? 100% yes. That is actually something we can say with certainty. That is something that's going to be working. But that doesn't mean it's set in stone, especially for a rook. So let's see how that actually rolls out. Do you think they bother playing Jameis in preseason? Yes, it is a random question, but yeah, I would be pretty surprised if he doesn't see snaps. But yeah, I expect Jameis to see some snaps. Also, got my eye on a signed Jameis jersey. So we'll see how that goes. Let's go have 6 sacks in his first 13 games. That is Vlad's hot take. And sure, okay. I am not going to dispute it. I'm not even going to say it's a bad take. What I will say is that's a lot. That is more than the average defensive end gets in the NFL. And that's definitely more than the average second-round defensive end gets in the NFL. But beyond that, definitely doesn't mean it's impossible. The last New Orleans Saint as a rookie defensive lineman to get 6 sacks. I'm going to go through the list because I honestly don't remember who. Let's see if we can find the last Saints defensive lineman to get 6 sacks as a rook. Now, you had Kikaha, who had, 4? You had Davenport, who had 4.5. Sheldon Rankins as a rook did not have 6. He had 4 as a rookie, and that was when he was pairing with Nick Fairley, if I remember correctly. Continuing on down the list, you had Cameron Jordan, who had 1 sack as a rookie. Continuing down the list even further, Cedric Ellis will be your next first rounder. Cedric Ellis as a rook had 4. Seems to be kind of a common theme there with defensive tackles. Shout out to Brian. If he can hit 4, then you're definitely on success lane. If you go all the way back to Will Smith, 2004, he had 7.5. So if anybody in chat had Will Smith, Tidra, and Lester win and 992 as well. Will Smith, so you've been 19 years since a Saints first-round defensive lineman, and it's not like they haven't drafted him, has had 6 or more sacks as a rookie. Will Smith would go to do 7.5 as a rook, 8.5, 10.5, then 7, 3, 13, 5.5, 6.5, and then finally 6 in his final year of his career in 2012. And then 2013, I think, was the infamous Junior Gillette year. So there's your the last time. Again, not saying that it's impossible to happen, just that it's rare. You don't see a lot of rookies pop off like that, but certainly I'm here for it as a prediction. And you did list as a hot take, Vlad, so it's not like I'm coming at you. I just think it's definitely something worth discussing. But it's also something that I think most years people think the number is higher than it is. As in, again, this isn't directed at Vlad. I think this is just kind of speaking openly about the league and how players are viewed and expectations coming in. I think overall, there is an expectation that is above what typically tends to happen. And if you go even last year, go over the sack leaders. If you find and you go and look at this, usually guys who've been in the league for a few years are the ones who dominate the boards. And the all-time sack leaders are obviously going to be some greats that I'm always here for. But even them, Cameron Jordan being a great example, didn't start off super fast, super strong. So let's go through and look at last year. I'm going to pull up your sack numbers thanks to Pro Football Reference. We're going to pull up the sack numbers and just totals, and we're going to see how many. Let's just start with the highest rook. Who's the highest rook last year? And I know it's not this one. I'm going to look just because I don't remember how many years he's been in the league. Let me see how many years. That was his second. Okay. So Micah Parsons did have 13 as a rook. I knew he had 13 and a half last year. And granted, we're talking about an all-pro there, a defensive player of the year, or defensive rookie of the year. He was second defensive player of the year, and then I think he was second defensive player of the year last year as well. But let's keep down the list, see if we can find a rook and where they were. And I kind of have to sort this by age. Aiden Hutchinson might be the most. Was Aiden Hutchinson the most? He had 9.5. And for reference, where he placed on the entire list, 21st. He was 21st amongst the league. And that just kind of gives you an idea that, this is a position that we talk about like grown man strength and all those other things. Most players take a few years to really get those numbers up there. King says, I'm telling you, Foskey's an animal. I liked his tape. I put out a film study that's surprising. I mean, people really enjoyed it. I liked his tape. I don't think he's an animal because when I look at him, I see a more technical player, but not someone who has the physical dominance of other guys. And that actually makes me like him a little bit more. And what I mean by that is like Davenport coming in was an animal. Like you talk about a player, usually when you describe somebody as an animal, you're talking about somebody who has the physical nature and the body makeup to simply dominate in that manner, but maybe that doesn't have the refined ability of a vet, right? He has the potential to really be a special guy, but he comes in and you know that he can dominate at a high degree against certain guys. And Davenport was a good example of that. Now, for many reasons, that didn't work out. I wouldn't put Foskey in that same category because he does not physically dominate that way. But he does have very good physical attributes, and he's a much more technically sound player, which in theory should translate to a much quicker transfer on the field. So to Vlad's prediction, you talk about, can he get 6 sacks in his rookie year? I mean, if he's a more technically sound player, yeah, it's actually, that plays into the potential of him having that level of success. And I didn't have 6 sack, expectations for Davenport. Davenport kind of hit what I expected as a rookie. Turner did not. And if you can have a guy hit something like that, that's just bodes so well for the future. Now, at the same time, I don't want to make it sound like I'm trying to knock his athletic ability, because another guy who was very technically sound was Aloha Kikaha. But Aloha Kikaha did not have anywhere near the physical ceiling that a guy like Davenport or Foskey have. And when he lost what athletic ability he did have, he never regained the ability to contribute at the NFL level. But before that happened, he was there, right? Just because of high technical skill. I think Foskey's coming in with better technical skill than Turner or Davenport did, but definitely doesn't come in with the animal physicality, just every snap dominates. And you can see that even in his college tape, and that's why his college tape did not have the number of pressures and the number of like quarterback muggings that we look for. He had really good sack numbers, which means that when he did win, technically, he won very cleanly, and he got to the quarterback and did a great job. But he also wasn't physically dominating, which means that he's got to, one, get bigger, get stronger, and I think he will in an NFL weight room, and two, continue to refine his technique. DeBree says, can you explain why people think our O-line is bad? When I see Penning, Pete, McCoy, Reeves, and Ramczyk, I see a good O-line. Well, the question for me is how Penning will do in our depth. Sure, more than happy to. Now, keep in mind that this is a very relative statement. I mean, when you say bad, who are you going off of? There was, for example, ESPN Talking Heads put out a release recently where they were ranking all aspects of teams. They said the New Orleans Saints front office was 28th in the NFL, below the Cleveland Browns, below the Detroit Lions, who haven't won a playoff game in like 9 years. So whose list are you really going by there? You got to be very careful. But I think the biggest thing is you don't have a guarantee at left tackle. Trevor Penning is a huge unknown. And even coming into the league was a guy that you felt was going to dominate more as a run guy and had a lot to learn as a technique guy. And then you've got Hurst, who we know is a reliable backup and a fringe starter. You've got Honors Pete, who can't stay healthy and is not the level of player that he was 3 or 4 years ago. I think he's still a solid starter. I don't think he's a bad starter, but he's also a guy that I'm already talking about, hey, can Nick Saldiveri be that future left guard? Can Saldiveri show that he can take that spot? Because I would give it to Saldiveri next year. I really would. Honors Pete, look, you done some good stuff, man. I definitely think you got way more shade than you deserved when you were here. But I do think the writing is on the wall for Pete. Maybe he has 2 or 3 more years. Then you've got McCoy, who is a very high-end center, but I wouldn't call him an all-pro. You've got Ruiz, who has had 1 high-end year. You definitely can't count a singular high-end season as a guy that is necessarily reliable. You've got 2 bad years of tape, 1 great year of tape. That doesn't exactly balance out. He's got to at least do it again this year. And then Ryan Ramczyk, and I think a lot of this has been due to lack of performance next to him. And then also, just some small injuries he's dealt with, is not the all-pro level player that he was just, 3 or 4 years ago. So I don't think that the New Orleans Saints offensive line on paper, until they prove it as a top 10 or top 5 offensive line unit, I do think they can be top 10, top 5. As in if Trevor Penning pans out, if Ruiz continues to be what Ruiz was last year, if Ramczyk has a good year, then yeah, now you're back in that conversation. But you're not right now. I think that's completely fair. Now, at the same time, are they anywhere near the bottom? No. I think it's ridiculous to put the New Orleans Saints offensive line at the bottom of the league. I think that's just silly. But would I put them at the top? I wouldn't put them in there either. They're somewhere in the middle. And I think that they're better, just to give reference, than the Las Vegas Raiders line from last year. And the Raiders is not the worst line in the league either. So there's a little bit of a balance to be found there. And if Penning doesn't work out, then you're talking about what is considered by many the most important position on the field for offensive lineman and left tackle. I personally, look, this is just opinion, and I'm completely cool because the market doesn't dictate this. I think center is more important overall, just because of the responsibility of the center when it comes to blocking assignments, understanding, and when it comes to their role on the field. Obviously, left tackles get paid the most, and right tackles getting a little bit more in recent years because they fight the edge rushers, which is the second highest paid position behind quarterback. So I think that there's a necessity to pay really good left tackles, and that makes sense. But I think center, and that's why Eric McCoy is so important, him staying healthy, and why I'm a little bit worried why the backup behind McCoy isn't a certain thing. But yeah, I'm cool with New Orleans being seen as a middling offensive line because I think that's what they are until they prove otherwise. And I think if you're being objective and you look around the league, there are a lot of teams that have solidified offensive lines, even if those solidified offensive lines are not necessarily great offensive lines. What I mean by that is you can have a good offensive line that isn't great, but they're solid. Like they've got good players on the team. They've got a roster that maybe you overlook them. And I think, you look at one of the best left tackles in the league, plays for one of the worst teams in the league. Anybody name who I'm talking about? I know a couple of y'all are going to name who I'm talking about, but just out of curiosity, anybody name who I'm talking about? One of the best left tackles in the league, currently playing for one of the worst teams. But my main point being that when you go through this process, you've got to find what's best that actually performs at a high level. See if anybody guessed it in chat. Rainey did. Rainey got it. Tunzel. Rainey got it. Laramie Tunzel is one of the better left tackles in the NFL. 28 years old. Negotiates his own contracts. He plays for Houston. It's not a good squad. And a lot of people probably aren't going to look his way from a fan perspective because, well, you're not going to see him in as many games. It's just not going to be there, right? But, yeah, he's been with Houston 4 years now, was with Miami, was a good player in Miami, has really taken off the past couple years with Houston, but he's with Houston. I mean, they're winning 3 games. You're not going to get excited about that. You're not really excited about that when you talk about it. But still, when you talk about them as an offensive line, like pull up the Houston Texans depth chart and be like, yeah, that's a solid. You can't help the fact that their quarterback is, trash. You can't help the fact that they don't really have anybody else. But, you got Tunzel, you got Kenyon Green, just a solid vet. You got Shaq Mason, another solid vet. Not great, solid. You got Dalton Schultz now at their tight end position, which I think is an upgrade in terms of just blocking tight end. You got Titus Howard at right tackle, and then they've got a rookie who will probably be their starting center in Juice Scruggs. So their question mark is the position I just said is the most important. But in terms of overall quality, I mean, I think that's a solid offensive line. Is it amazing? No. But I think the biggest issue among that one is the fact that your starting quarterback is a rookie, but last year was Davis Mills, backed up by Case Keenum. I really think it was the offensive line. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think that New Orleans having or being seen as anywhere between 13 and 19 as an offensive line, I would actually be completely fine with that and be like, yeah, I definitely see it. Because if New Orleans is back in the position this year, let's say that Trevor Penning doesn't end up panning out how we hope him to. That means that you've got James Hurst starting at left tackle or Trevor Penning simply being bad at left tackle. Anders Pete, who, even though I have defended him in recent years, I won't defend him on the playing every down front, so he's not going to play 17 games. I mean, just the odds of that are extremely low. If you were to go to do Vegas odds, if you put $10 down on that, I would not be surprised if you got 10 times your money if he managed to play 17 games because he's never played an entire 16-game season in his career. Could definitely do it, but it's doubtful. That means that you're going to have to rely on a backup. And in this case, that is probably a rookie. Again, that's going to make people who are looking at things objectively say that the New Orleans Saints offensive line is not something they can raise the top 10, and I completely get it. Sorry if I spent a long time on that topic, but I do really, really, really like talking offensive, defensive line. It's always kind of been my thing. The preseason was crazy is that I've heard a few times that the Raiders O-line last year is far better than the Saints O-line this year. Well, I guess that's a perspective thing and what you do and value is better. I think that there's a legitimate argument that could be made that the Raiders offensive line has been a better run blocking team, but I don't think that there's any argument that could be made that they're a better pass blocking team. Now, keep in mind that I think that Colton Miller is a good tackle. I think that, just their offensive line is good, but it's not great. I think it's similar to New Orleans. But it's undeniable, just from an analytical and statistical fact, that New Orleans was better last year in pass protection with worse quarterbacks. Please don't sit here and try to argue me that Derek Carr is a worse quarterback than Andy Dalton or hurt Jameis Winston. And if there's still some Jameis Winston diehards out there who say that Jameis Winston's talent level is, high, cool, sure. I'm not going to deny his talent level and his potential, but yeah, Brokeback Jameis Mountain is not better than Derek Carr. And yet the Saints offensive line put out way better numbers when it came to pressure percentages and things like that than the Raiders. I think that speaks a lot, right? And I know a lot of it just comes down to how many people really outside this team and any team are familiar with every team in the league. I don't think that there's a lot there. Hell, the only reason that we're familiar with what the Raiders offensive line has done in that perspective is because we picked up Derek Carr, thus necessitating us going and looking at that offensive line and saying, well, how did they do? Were they better? Were they worse? What are the things that we can compare so that we can try to guesstimate? Let's not lie. We're all making guesses, some of them educated, some of them not, about what Derek Carr can do. Well, when Derek Carr, over the past 3 or 4 years, is getting pressured 18, 19, 20% of his dropbacks. That's worse than what the New Orleans offensive line is doing. It just is. Now, then you get to the running side, and without really busting out tape, because that's the only real way to say who's better than who. And there are very few people in the world that I would trust to just bust out tape and start talking about who's the best offensive line. Like a little Charles Bentley, who not only played football, but also runs an academy now, teaches, does this as a career. The Duke Manyweather, if they want to come out and start talking about that, sure. Then we kind of put up and like, all right, well, maybe there's a point here. But until that starts happening, well, I'm not going to jump the boat and say, yeah, this is how it is. So there's not many people that I'm going to trust to do those type of comparisons and those type of studies. It just isn't. So, hell, if you could get Mouse, those don't know, Mouse is Jim McNally, who has been an O-line coach in the NFL and college for, God, longer than I've been alive. Hell, if he came out, because he actually does, I don't know if y'all follow offensive line. I love offensive line. I love defensive line. So I follow all of these guys on social media. But he's been really active on Twitter over the past year. If y'all want just a Twitter head to go follow who actually knows his stuff, Mouse, his name is Jim McNally. I don't know what he goes by without going and looking up on Twitter, but just look up Jim McNally. Now, just a warning for y'all, you are going to get typical old man tweeting, as in like there's going to be tweets where the dude's in all caps. There's going to be tweets where like it's clear that he doesn't really know how to film something, like he's doing it from his phone. He's recording a screen. Put all that aside and just like listen to what he's trying to teach, and you'll learn a lot. And if he comes out and says, look, this is what is the best and this is what's the worst round, then you can listen to that opinion and know that it's an educated, really well taught up position. And until those guys come out and say, oh yeah, Raiders definitely dominate New Orleans O-line, I'm going to be like, no, I think the Saints are slightly better. So you'll never check them out. I encourage you to. I mean, if I had to give you offensive line names to check out, the four that I would give you would be Jim McNally, Charles Bentley, Duke Manyweather, and Brandon Thorne. Those are probably the top four. Two of those work with O-line masterminds. That would be Brandon Thorne and Duke Manyweather. O-line masterminds as a summit is the biggest in, like statistically, just talking statistics, the most effective summit that exists for offensive line. Over recent years, Duke Manyweather, he actually put this out himself. 60 of the 64 people that he has worked with have made NFL teams, whether through practice squads or through the draft. If he works with somebody, they get better and they perform. And that includes multiple people in the NFL that have been New Orleans Saints, like Teron Armstead. And Andres Peat got better after going to Duke Manyweather. Now, did he ever become all-pro amazing? No, but he definitely got better after working with Duke. So these are all kind of things that I would shout out. And then, of course, like I said, Mouse, and then yeah, I listed all four. Those would be four. I mean, we could go grab more if we want to go through like just Twitter lists, but that'd probably be really good for to go check out. So it's hard to really know if I know these people, don't know what they're talking about, or just a homer with a crazy bias. For sure. It's easier when you know a guy's pedigree. Like, for example, I just gave you one that's a longtime coach. You know, if Alex Gibbs, who is a famous coach when it comes to run schemes, came out, you know, and was doing stuff like this, it's easy to know his history and what he's done well and what he has. I mean, Alex Gibbs, you can trace to Houston running game. You can trace to the Denver running game when he was coaching in the 90s and with the West Coast offense. You can trace Alex Gibbs in really inventing outside zone, and how you've got more than half the NFL teams in the league today using it, and most of them using it as their predominant run style. So you can definitely find guys, but then you have others that, like, unless you actually go out and understand what guys like Duke are doing, you're not going to know. Unless you understand what Jari Evans is doing and Charles Bentley, as in they were good players, in Jari's case, Hall of Fame level player, but are then going to the next level and being coaches and educators and evaluators. You just don't know. So you got to do your own work and check it out. Y'all got to check out Underhill's pod from this week with T-Stead. Good listen. Good call out. Good call out. That's a man that I hope that retires back to New Orleans. I really do. Really do. Just because they have some names don't mean they play well together. I mean, that can definitely be true, Joseph, 100%. And I think that the Raiders are a solid group. I'm not here to trash the Raiders and say I think that the Raiders' offensive line is the worst in the NFL or at the bottom. But I do think that when it came to what, in my opinion, is more important to today's league, which is pass protection, I think that New Orleans was better, and New Orleans was better with a makeshift offensive line. So, yeah, just a thought. What do you think is the most creative way of using Taysom and Kamara both on the field and at the same time? I think for Kamara and Taysom, wildcat, single back looks that have both of them on the field, and those single back looks, like those pistol looks, are going to be option type plays. I think those are the most effective way, and then putting both of them out in space as receivers in opposing Y positions. So like Kamara in the slot to the left, and then Hill at your tight end spot, maybe a two-step wide alignment, so right outside the tackle box and kind of like a shallow slot. Just little alignments like that, I think, is putting them in the best situation. Every now and then, I still think that Taysom Hill should make a throw. I really do. And I think that Alvin Kamara and him on the field together create a identity crisis for a defense where they have to simply respect and focus on what can happen in those first 10 yards, which opens up the potential for something to happen behind that. I think there are a lot of ways to make it work. What it really comes down to is Pete Carmichael last year did not do this. All right, there's a couple things that I harped on a lot last year that Pete Carmichael did not do. Three of them, I'm just going to name three of them. I'm not going to mention tendency breakers, but three big things that he did not do enough of. Motion, play action, and Taysom Hill consistently being on the field. And whether or not you use Taysom Hill, as in whether or not you put the ball in his hands, Taysom Hill needs to get touches to, one, be consistent, and two, remain a consistent threat in defense's eyes. He cannot go entire games being nothing but a decoy, which is exactly what happened last year. And those three things have got to change for this offense to get better. Play action, as I talk about every year, is effective regardless of how good your run game is. Can it benefit from your run game being better? Absolutely. But it's good no matter what. You need play action. You want to run play action. You want to do motion. Motion is so important for your offense. And the reason it's so important is, one, as a quarterback, it automatically helps you diagnose what's opposite from y'all. If y'all haven't checked out the Netflix docu-series about quarterbacks, they even talk about this. Putting a guy in motion lets you get a pre-snap read of zone versus man and help you understand. Hell, Patrick Mahomes went into a whole in-depth discussion about how he uses motion to simply identify and better recognize when nickel blitzes happen. So you need to use these things. I don't necessarily say you need to use them every play, but you definitely need to get your guys moving. Make sure that you are giving varied and different looks. And even little things matter that we may not think about, but there are things like if you're a wide receiver, there's a such thing as a +2 and a +5 alignment in terms of where you're lining up on the field. Those things matter. And if you ever read a Sean Payton playbook, and we're going to always bring up Sean Payton because he's the greatest coach this team's ever have. If you read a Sean Payton playbook, his plays are like that all the time. You're like, oh, well, this one looks very similar to that one, but what are the differences? Well, this player is lined up 5 yards wider, and then this player is actually lined up 2 yards behind. He's going to make those because it's going to change how routes develop and how defenses adjust in the middle of the run. Like as the play is happening, the fact that you're lined up this way is going to determine what this guy's doing way over here differently. And you've got to be, in terms of as a play caller and a play designer, able to see what that does. And that's what made Peyton special, was not only the ability to design plays, but to understand how to apply them in situations on the field. So I think Taysom and Kamara need to be on the field more. And that doesn't mean that Derek Carr has to be on the field less, but I do think that if you really want this team, as long as Taysom Hill can continue to show that he can be a dominant X factor, which he has been for years, you put him on the field. And there just cannot be games like there were last year where Taysom Hill has just disappeared. And I don't blame last year's disappearance of Taysom Hill on Taysom Hill. Like, if you go look at his stat boxes, there are entire games where nothing happens with Taysom. Like, what was it? The Baltimore game, Taysom Hill touched the ball 2 times. Dose, as in 1 and then 2 right after. Then it was the Pittsburgh game. Taysom Hill touched the ball like 3 times. I think it was Arizona, another game we lost, touched the ball like 3 times. And I realized that at times, some of these games, you're behind. But just because you're behind, you can't let your offense get destroyed. And if your offense becomes even more one-dimensional, then that's when turnovers start happening. Call out a couple of those games. And it's not a coincidence that the best games New Orleans had are the games where he got a multitude of touches. It's not a coincidence. It doesn't mean that Taysom Hill needs to be your offense, but he sure damn well better be a big part of it. And they definitely had stretches of games where they forgot. And Pete Carmichael called himself out on that. The whole thing is he's got to fix it. He's got to fix it. TJ says that Jamal and AK got to be on at the same time. I agree. Hell, Miller and AK got to be on the field at the same time. Like, I want to see a gun formation, 2-back set with Miller and an AK standing right next to Derek Carr. I don't care if both of them run wheel routes. I don't care if both of them run screens. Yeah, I'll run a tunnel screen to one side and a bubble screen to the other. That doesn't matter. I want them on the field at the same time. You got to be creative if you draft weapons. If you draft weapons, you better be creative with them. So, I mean, the guy that's on the hot seat the most for me, and I've not shied away from this at all offensively, is definitely Pete Carmichael. He's definitely on the hot seat. So, got to get all them on the field more. And if I had to give Taysom Hill a minimum touch amount, minimum touches a game, I think is 7. Absolute minimum. TJ says 5. I think if you want to go minimum, 7. And if you're talking about total number of plays, usually the offense is going to run between 60 and even up to 80 plays. Giving him 7 of those, I don't think is being crazy. Because let's just say you give AK 15, you're at 22, you still got 2/3 of the plays to give away. You can still go give 10 to Olave. You can still go give 5 to Juwan Johnson. You can still go give 5 more to Michael Thomas. You can still go give 5 more to Rashid Shaheed. And you still have more to give away. I think that Taysom Hill, just because of what he's shown historically as an X factor, and it might sound weird for those who've listened to the show a long time, like, wow, Rev's really banging the table for Taysom Hill. I've always banged the table for Taysom Hill as a playmaker, just now as a quarterback. But there is no there is no denying 32 touchdowns in 5 years. Like, and that's just as a runner and receiver. That doesn't even count him throwing the ball. There's no denying the man puts TDs on the field. Now, one year, 2020, was the one year that I really come to Taysom because he had a tremendous fumble problem. I don't know how many people remember 2020, but Taysom fumbled a lot. Now, keep in mind that 2020 is also a year that he spent more time at quarterback. That dude fumbled the ball a lot in 2020. But besides that, yeah, I mean, he's definitely proven that you put the ball in his hands, great things happen. Intro says Dennis is on the hot seat. I'll be honest, I don't think he is. Unless he bombs, right? And when I'm saying I don't think he is, I'm not saying from my perspective. I'm saying from New Orleans' perspective. I don't think when it comes to Ms. Gail Benson and Mickey Loomis that he's on the hot seat. That's just my opinion based on his status in the front. Now, if he wins 3 games, yeah, he's on the hot seat. But if DA had, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, I'm just going to say, if DA went 7-10, he's still here. And I know Saints fans are going to blast the hell out the organization if that happens. I'm just letting you know that I believe that if New Orleans goes 7-10, you're still going to deal with Dennis Allen for at least one more year. You are. Absolutely are. And I know people don't want to hear that. But if you go 7-10 another year in a row, he's still going to be the coach in 2024. I believe that. Now, if he bombs it, starts off 0-4, or the team only wins 4 games a season, yeah, they're going to look to replace him. But he chose Pete as OC. I honestly don't think that's the case. I think that New Orleans just didn't have another option. Pete didn't want to, they had moved Pete out of that position 2 years ago. But he ended up having to come back last year. I don't think that was the case. I don't think Dennis Allen's over here banging the drum for Pete Carmichael. I just don't really think the Saints have a lot of options, which I guess is a whole nother conversation about why the Saints can't pull in another offensive coordinator. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. That's a whole other podcast episode. But I don't think that they want Pete Carmichael. I mean, it is what it is, and you're not going to trash talk the guy that's next to you. But I think if it was up to DA, there'd be somebody else being the offensive coordinator. I really do. I really do. I think if he could hand pick his offensive coordinator out of somebody around the league, it would not be Pete Carmichael. That's just my opinion. And again, that's also why I think that when it comes to as an organization, I think the organization has more confidence in Dennis Allen than Saints fans do. And I think they have more leeway with him than Saints fans do. Whereas Saints fans want to get back immediately to winning seasons. The franchise is looking at it more of a complete rebuild that may take 3 years. And they're probably going to give him that. Again, unless he just ridiculously bombs. And just to point out that I think that, in terms of what Dennis Allen does as a coach, he still did a damn good job defensively. Now, it started off a little bit rough. I think that he had some hiccups there. But I think a lot of that was your safeties. You got to get adjusted to your scheme. And defensive line is not where you wanted it to be last year. But that defense was still a top 10 defense. At the end of the year, they were playing top 5. So he was doing his job. But obviously, wins, losses, falls on the head coach. I completely get that, and I agree with that. But, yeah, I think it's going to take a lot for Dennis Allen to be gone. So if you are anti-DA, well, a lot's got to happen for you to not see DA in the building no more. A teacher says, I believe Pete will have a better season in play calling at OC. Go for it. I'm here for it. I'm here. Absolutely want it to happen. I think if you had a better offensive coordinator, you could have a hell of a lot more confidence in DA. We'll see. We'll see. He says they built the team around Jameis, who got hurt. Then they lose wide receivers, tight ends, and O-linemen, running backs too. Maybe. I'm not saying context isn't important. We fight for context all the time. So you are absolutely correct in bringing up these things. Just like I'm excited about Foskey. Foskey. I'm excited about seeing the offense fresh. I like new opportunities. But am I confident in Pete Carmichael? No. Do I want to see him be different? Absolutely. Absolutely. So, TJ says, Armstead also spoke highly of DA. There are not many players that are going to speak negatively of DA. I mean, he's a player's coach. A lot of them like him. And I know for fans, they don't really care about that. And I completely get fans not caring about that. But again, when it comes to the facility, unless that man bombs, you're going to have a whole nother year. You're going to have a whole nother year. Whole nother year. So, worried about Woods? I'm worried about planes. Hey, that's a lame joke. Y'all can stop following the podcast now. I'll retire. I'll retire after that one. That was terrible. You could say we plateaued. Damn. More geography jokes. Great. That's where the podcast has gone. Players don't usually speak negative of any coach. I don't know, man. No. There's definitely some coaches that get some shade thrown their way. Greg Williams certainly gets shade thrown his way from players from every team he's coached. So I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know if I agree with that with Troll. No, there's definitely some coaches that get chat talk. DH is not one of them. Yeah, and Chauncey definitely will shit talk. But I think Chauncey has shown that he'll shit talk anybody. Chauncey trash talk coach that just took it to the Super Bowl. And I like that man was garbage. So that man just trashed everybody. Anyway, guys, we are going to wrap up. Hope y'all enjoyed the show. We're going to wrap up. We'll be back again, of course. Y'all are amazing as always. Join the Discord if you haven't already. It's completely free. Doesn't cost you anything. And lets you talk with more Saints fans. And hell, even ask me more questions if you have them as we prepare for the season. Trying to find tickets to the joint practice with the Chargers? Nice, Charles. Very nice. You going to training camp? Remember, get y'all's tickets to training camp because it might not cost anything, but there is limited seating. Who dat to you? God bless. We love and appreciate every single one of y'all as listeners and viewers. Catch you on the next one. Deuces, that's me. We out.